something? Oh, that's not as fast.
All right, guys. All right, so where we left off, when our page loads, it's holding the server, and we're getting the data to the reducer. We're not actually updating the state with anything yet. So this is what our action looks like when it makes it to the reducer. So if we look on the payload property, there's a data property, and then on the data property, there's a to-do property. So this is all the information we want. All the information about our to-do item. So what we want to do is we want to update our state with that information. So in the list reducer, in our default state, we already have a single object. So we want to set that single object to be our new to-do item. So instead of just returning state here, we're going to return a new object. We're going to deconstruct whatever state originally was. And then we're going to set the single property to action.payload.data.to-do. So that should now update our Redux state to have a single property that will hold all of our single items information.
Let's listen.
All right. So once we have that, we should now be able to pull this information into our component so we can display it to the user. Anybody still need a second here? All good? All right, so from here, we're going to go back to view item. Now, whenever we want to pull information from the Redux state, what do we use? Map state to props. We have to define a function that will build an object that will get added to our props that contains the information we need. So we'll say function map state to props. This function will get the Redux state entirely passed into us. And then whatever we return from this function will get added onto our component's props. So we'll say item is equal to state dot list dot single. And then we need to make sure we plug this function into everything. So we need to, down in connect, we need to replace null with the name of our function.
What is the list?
List is a property in our state that we defined. If we look at our index reducers, list. Could be anything, whatever we make it. All right, so now that we've connected all this together, we should have all of our items information available onto our components props at this.props.item. So inside of our render method, we should be able to say console.log item. That should be this.props.item. You should see that console log 2 times, once with an empty object, and then once with the actual data after the call returns from the server. So you should have your item that has all your information in it. Yes.
Would you mind going back to list reducers? I'm having issues where I wrote in on get symbol item.
Yep. Anybody have any trouble? We're going to walk through the steps of what's happening again, but I want to make sure everyone is with me first.
Let's get an error on the map box. Then let's return the point object instead of receive.
Maps. The map stage box. There should be a view item. Did you not return an object?
Oh, return.
You gotta return an object. So this is a function. You have to return an object with an item property set to that value.
Also like return.
Return an object.
You already deleted get single item console log?
Maybe.
In list users?
Okay.
They're just console logs, man. You can delete it if you want. You can leave yours if you want. I think I deleted mine though. There you go. Yeah. It has to return an object. Test it, make sure it works. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
So then on list reducer and reducers,
Uh-huh.
the way you want to store stuff, like how we're storing in single and we have all, would we ever like possibly like instead of single breakdown like description and title and store that with the state, or we would just keep it as a whole?
Yeah, because you want to keep, because it's all part of one item.
And then break it down in like view item. That's where we'll break down.
Yeah, when you import it, you could break it down further. Usually in state, you don't want to necessarily break it down that far.
Okay.
But like anything, it's what are you trying to accomplish? What works best for what you're trying to do? As long as it works for what you're doing, then it's the right way to do it. So everyone good?
Excuse me.
So let's walk through what happens when we refresh the page.
How about that? Ooh, viewing items.
Dun, dun, dun. You guys don't have to copy this. Remember, you guys can do stuff like this too. Whenever you're having a hard time understanding what the order of stuff is happening, console logs and everything. But let's walk through this. So if we look at our console logs, we're going to go through console logs and we'll go through the actual code. But if we look at our console logs, the first thing that happens is the items render method is called. Okay? At that point, we have no data. Okay? After the render method is called, then the component did mount is called.
Bless you.
Okay? So render is called before did mount. Because mounting means it was already added to the DOM. It's already been rendered one time. So render, component mounts. When the component mounts, it calls our action creator. So we see our action creator called, get single item. That function returns the action into the reducer. So now the reducer gets called. The type properties match. So list reducer called with action type gets single item. And then finally, the render method is called again because now it has new information, which is our list item. So what that looks like in the code is first thing that happens is this method's called render. So this stuff shows up on the screen. You see our console log, this shows up on the screen. Now that that's been called, within a tenth of a millisecond, now component did mount is called. Like as soon as render is called, then this is called. All right. So component did mount, we have our console log, and then in here we're calling this other function, get single item. Okay, so we're calling get single item. So if we go over to our actions index, that is this function is now being called. This function makes a request to the server, goes out our console log, and returns an object. This object right here gets passed into our list reducer as action. When it hits the proper case, we see our console log, and our state object gets updated to this value. Okay? Since the state was updated, this value is now inside of state. So we go back over to view item. All this map state to prop stuff runs again. And then finally, the render method is called again. This time, there's actually data in this .props.item. Okay? That's the full update cycle. Our app triggers something. If you remember that rectangle grid from before, the app triggers some event, calls the action creator. The action creator is just a function that returns an object. That object then gets passed to the reducer. Reducer is another function that also returns an object. That object that the reducer returns becomes the new piece of state. And then this information flows back into our application, causing whatever's using it to re-render with the updated data. All right, so now that we have our item, actually, before we do anything for it, anybody have any questions about that? Yes, sir.
I have on the second time that console log is called, there's nothing coming up for the desktop props.
Okay, so there's a couple different places where there could be a disconnect. One would be here, so state.list.single. Go. No, it's here. So it's coming as undefined. So you're setting when you're setting your state instead of your reducer, it's wrong. Action.payload.data to do no s. Just a single one. Make sure you save your files. There you go. Cool. Anything else? Yes.
So after component fit now, it goes to the action creator.
It goes to whatever you call. So we're calling this, right?
Oh, okay.
So it calls that function. So then it goes, yeah, because we're calling the. It's not that it goes there. So we are calling the action creator. Good clarifying question. Thank you. All right. Anything else? Doing, done. So we're not going to spend a lot of time with this, but we will display a couple pieces of information. So inside of our item, we have title and details. There's some other information. If you want to elaborate on this in the future, you can. Right now, I just want to display the title and details. So I'm just going to do something very simple, nothing fancy. Inside a render, I'm going to destructure my item object. I'm going to say details and title equal this dot props dot item. That will pull title details from props. And then below here, I'm just going to do a p tag with a bold. And say title, and then curly brackets, title, and do the same thing for details. Nothing fancy. Whoa, what is that? And details. All right, and then of course you could pull off more information from items to display more useful information. But the point of this isn't about UI design, this is about functionality. So that's all we're going to do with it. And we're going to jump into talking about middleware. All right, so if you run that, you should be able to come to your browser and you should see the title. We should add a go back button really quick. I believe this is the one where we made a component for that, right? A navigation component. So if we look at, we have nav button, and it takes in a color, to, and text. So inside of view item up at the top, I am going to import nav button from this directory nav button. And then right below my H1, I'm going to throw in nav button. I'm going to tell it to be blue, which I think it was already, but I'm going to tell it to go to home, and the text will be back to list. And if you still need the code, I'll come right back to it. Just want to test it out. So you should have something that looks like this. We should be able to click on it. It should take you back to the list. We should be able to click on another to-do item, and you'll notice that your title and details change according to what your item is. And if you refresh the page, you get the correct information. I go back.
Ooh, now we know. Oh my.
I didn't know. And if we refresh the page, we still have the same incriminating evidence that we had before.
Someone could have wrote my name on these.
I don't think so. No one else could type your name. That's impossible.
Same person. Okay.
All right. So once again, and the beauty of this, and I can't stress it enough, and it's hard to really express how cool and important it is without until you actually just run into this issue and fully understand it. But the fact of being able to refresh this page and then pull the right data is crucial. Don't worry, you'll all run into it and be frustrated by it. But just remember, I tried to tell you. All right, so everybody got their item view working? Doesn't have to be perfect. Just
Go back to that page.
as long as it's generally.
Yeah, my title.
You have the information when you console log in? The second one, you got it? Everybody good? You get your vendors?
Yeah. Pretty much done.
What other cool little neat trick I want to show you guys? This is something I actually learned fairly recently that I thought was kind of cool. Is you'll notice it's really fast, but the call is almost happening too fast. But for a split second, this is blank here because there's no data. So the first time it renders, there's no data there. There's all kinds of different things you can do to handle that. One thing you do is you could do a check to see if item or if title details is not defined. You know, just return something completely different. So you could do something like if not title, return an H1 loading. Okay. Remember, the render method is just a method. You can return anything you want from it. So if you want to make a decision on what is being rendered, because you can run into the issue where this stuff could throw errors too. So if you don't have the right data and you try and render the right data, this is set up in such a way it'll help avoid some of the errors. But if it wasn't set up this way, you might end up with some errors. This would help you avoid those errors by checking to see if you have the data before you try rendering the data. So if you look ever so quickly, now these are very simple server calls to a server that doesn't have a lot of traffic. The only traffic it has is what you guys are doing on it right now. Okay? It's not a highly used website, so the calls are super fast. And it's using a very basic MongoDB and stuff, so it's fast. It's a very fast server. That's usually not the case. So you want stuff to say, hey, I'm loading, because that might be there for a couple seconds. A couple seconds when you're just staring at a blank page or it throws errors. or something like that will discourage people from using your website. So it's always nice to put some kind of loading message, some type of spinner, something to say like, hey, the website is doing stuff, just give it a second. We've all experienced where websites don't tell you if they're doing something, and then you don't know whether to stare at it or refresh the page. Most of the time you either refresh the page or just leave. So you want to try and give some useful feedback to your users. One other thing you could do, and this is, I'm not necessarily recommending this way, it's just a way of showing you. Just like you could set default parameters on a function, just like we did with list reducer, where we're saying, hey, if state doesn't exist, set it to default state. You can actually do that with destructuring. So we can say if details doesn't exist, set it to the string loading details. And you do the same thing for anything that you destructure. And you can see it appears for a split second. So you can set defaults to destructured values. I actually just learned this a couple months ago. I didn't even know you could do that. So I thought I'd share with you guys.
What about a spinner? Is this a situation where you possibly put like
I would put a spinner in here, yeah. Yeah, and the way you would do that is instead of setting these defaults, you actually wouldn't want those. You do it the same way that I just showed. So you just do like if not title, and then you would just make like a spinner component. Now, obviously, that's not a real thing, but you could make a spinner component. Okay.
So I read somebody or heard somebody did this thing where, because sometimes that timing between that load is so small, like create a set timer or make it.
Absolutely not. That is horrible advice.
Oh, you make the delay.
It'll make a slight delay so it actually shows the spinner for a second.
No, if your delay is that fast, just be happy. And if your spinner doesn't have time to render, it doesn't have time to render.
I wanted to see the spinner.
Well, like the squirrel receipts, and they're showing that it'll like flash the squirrel in between the page load, but it was like so fast. It's like, oh, well,
yeah, that's a good problem to have. Though.
It makes you curious. Like, I want to see the squirrel.
That's what I kept thinking. Can we see the squirrel?
See the squirrel, man. So squirrely. Yeah. Here's the thing, though, is as stuff grows in complexity, the spinner will eventually start staying around longer, especially when it's loading certain things. Like the new portal site we're building, I built a spinner, and I was kind of like, man, no one ever sees a spinner, but as it's grown in complexity, and as you're pulling larger amounts of data from it and stuff, there's parts where you actually get to see the spinner, which is cool, but at the same time, it's like, now it's slow. All right, so everybody got their view details working? Just in time for lunch, we're going to talk about middleware. We'll talk about middleware when we come back from lunch. We have a minute, isn't going to do it. What I want everybody to do right now, though, is I want everybody to go through all your files, clear out all of your console logs. Okay, if you're shaky about deleting console logs, just comment them out, just because I want your console to be clean. Or when we come back from lunch, once you think you've cleared out all your console logs, do a quick test. Make sure you don't see any. Check both my pages, or all three of my pages. Cool, looks clean enough. And once you've got your console logs all cleaned up, go ahead and add a commit and push. We're not going to merge it or anything. We'll keep working on the same branch, but just essentially create a save point for yourself in case your computer blows up during lunch. All right, before we go to lunch, last thing. Oh my gosh. Everybody's detail page is working, right? Everybody got they'll view their items. Everyone's good? All right, see you guys about 2:30-ish. Enjoy your lunch. So when we get back, straight to middleware. It is time.